Want us to move our freshly buried family member from the family plot? Enjoy not being able to access your farm this spring and your ruined reputation. In May of 2024, my 40s wife's 40s sister, Sarah, 40s, and her fiancé Heath, then 40s, got married. They'd been together for 8 years, and in that time, Heath had become the father Sarah's daughter Kate, 16, had always deserved. A few weeks after the wedding, he formally adopted Kate. Heath was the kind of man who you couldn't help but love. Funny, genuine, hardworking, always the first to offer help, always the last one to leave a party because he stayed to clean up. He always looked for an excuse to get the family together, to fire up his grills and break out the bourbon. The last time he did it was his 50th birthday. A month later, almost to the day, he suffered a massive heart attack and died. I stood with him as groomsman, as did our younger brother-in-law, 30s, and a good friend of Heath's. 6 months later, in the same church, we were his pallbearers. To say our family was, and still is, devastated is an understatement. Our side of the family is a close-knit bunch. We tend to drop the in-law title. My brothers-in-law are my brothers, my wife's sisters are my sisters, and their parents see the three of us as their sons. We genuinely look forward to spending time with one another. And when Heath came on the scene, he quickly became the heart of the family. To both celebrate and mourn the same person in equal fashion in such a short time span was nothing any of us expected, and something I frankly wouldn't wish on anyone. Heath was meticulous in a lot of ways, but the only plan he didn't have in place was where he wanted to be buried. A few weeks before he passed, he and our mother-in-law, Jackie, 70s, talked about final plans, just conversation. No one knew anything was wrong at the time. She had mentioned wanting to being buried in a family plot with her grandparents and her parents. She said that after she and my father-in-law, Mitch, 70s, passed, there would be 2 to 4 spaces available as most of her cousins had made other arrangements. Heath said he liked the thought of resting beside them. Cut to November of 2024, Heath was gone, plans had to be made quickly, and space was available. He died on a Saturday. We buried him the following Friday. On Monday, Jackie received a phone call from one of her cousins, Bertha, 60s, not to offer condolences but to ask, "How could you bury that stranger next to Grandma?" The conversation was mostly one-sided. Bertha went on and on about how wrong it was that this man was buried next to their grandmother, that she'd visited the town hall to see what could be done. Jackie's only response was, "Bertha, he was my son. We just buried him." We didn't know what else to do. Mitch told us he'd never seen her so angry in 45 years of marriage. They decided it best not to tell Sarah just yet. She didn't need the stress on top of mourning. A few days passed, Jackie got call from Charlotte, 70s, another cousin's wife. Charlotte went on to tell Jackie that Bertha and her sister had obtained a lawyer and were going to attempt to sue Sarah for Heath's removal. It was at this point that Mitch and Jackie decided to go to Sarah and Kate's house and tell them what was going on. Sarah was understandably angry, confused, and hurt. She owned the plot that Heath was buried in and the plot beside it, so legally she was fine. But beyond that, how can someone who calls themselves family do this? One of the last people to hear the news was my wife. Not because they didn't want her to know, but because she's a firm believer in going full scorched earth when someone screws with the people she loves. They wanted advice. There needs to be a bit of context added for the next part. Before Jackie's grandparents died, they set aside a 12-plot space in the local cemetery to accommodate the needs of their kids and grandkids. A good bit of forward thinking, as Jackie's mother was one of 5 daughters. As fate would have it, the only one of the 5 daughters who was buried there was Jackie's mother, in addition to her father and her cousin. So, of the 12 plots, only 5 were in use at the time. Each of the 5 sisters also inherited a bit of farmland, and each built houses close by. Their children, Jackie and Bertha's generation, grew up close to each other, and so a few of them stuck around and built homes to raise their children as well. My wife and Sarah's generation. Jackie and her brother inherited some land from their mother, which they rented out to be farmed. Next to it is Bertha and her twin sister's land. Both are accessed by the same path, the only access to Bertha's land. By the way, roadside access is owned by the state. The path itself is owned entirely by Jackie and her brother. I'll spare the details of my wife's reaction, but suffice it to say, at the end of the conversation she had suggested moving Heath, moving her grandparents, and establishing a family cemetery elsewhere. If they want it, they can fucking choke on it, was what my wife said. This wasn't contrition, it was a fuck you, and my in-laws approved. The legality of it all, and realized a little later, was that the majority of the remaining plots would become entirely unusable. Moving Heath and Jackie's parents would create 3 empty plots. Sarah's plot would be a 4th, Mitch and Jackie's would make 6 spaces total, all owned by our family. This means that of the original 12, there would be only 3 empty plots left not owned by us. In the interim, another family member passed and was buried there. 2 unclaimed plots of 12 with 6 sitting empty and can't be used. To some, that would be enough. To my wife, a woman who thinks burning bridges give off a lovely glow, this was only the appetizer to a meal that will take years to finish. More on that in a moment. We set aside space on the family's farmland to lay Heath and Jackie's parents to rest back in January of this year. It's quiet there, set against tall pines with open fields leading up to it. It's a good spot, and with plenty of room for those of us who want it to be our place of rest. The only issue is that the path to access it is pretty far away. At my wife's suggestion, when planting season starts, Jackie and her brother will ask the people who rent the land to disc over the path and establish a new one closer to the cemetery. By the way, as mentioned above, this is the only access to Bertha's land. We haven't told her, and we're not planning on it. The whole frontage of her land is covered in trees. Hopefully she finds out before the folks who farm it show up to start planting for the season. For all her disgusting behavior though, some I left out because this is already pretty long. Bertha is a highly respected medical educator in the community. She's known to just about every nurse in the county. Hell, she was my wife's nursing instructor in college. Thing is, my wife is also well established and highly respected in the community, and she's made sure that word is getting out about Bertha's behavior. It's a slow trickle, but that's often what wears stone down the best. Water is patient like that. Might take a little bit, but once it's done, you can't unchanged what people know about you. Edit. The night nurse is indeed my wife. Edit 2. My wife made a comment in this post that Bertha would have to prove malicious intent, and several folks have pointed out that this post could be proof as such. She's asked me to relay this where it's more visible, and I quote, "To clarify, she'd have to prove that my mother and uncle's intent was malicious. Mine is, no question, but I have legal dog in this fight, so to speak. I simply came up with the idea, and then pointed out it'd be an excellent fuck you, while also solving a few different problems. The decisions ultimately lay in the hands of my mother and uncle, who are the property owners. My uncle consulted City Hall about the legalities of the exhumation, and he spoke to a lawyer about the legalities regarding the farmland, which is how we know we still have to allow her access to the easement which runs along the front of the property. And if she wants to come at me for slander, she has to prove anything I'm saying is untrue. I have a feeling she's not going to push back too hard because, since we're digging up skeletons, I know several of hers that she wouldn't want uncovered.